Hi, I'm with my friend Chris Martenson of peakprosperity.com. How are you doing, Chris?
Mike, I'm doing so good today. How about yourself?
Great. I'm so glad to have you here. You were on a trip recently, and can you tell us what trip that was and whether the markets feel any different to you?
Well, I was on a summit at sea, which was an interesting sort of experience. Robert Kiyosaki was there, a bunch of very high net worth individuals, mostly in the real estate space. G. Edward Griffin was there. And first time meeting him, got to have a long dinner with him. We had this incredible conversation where it's on a cruise ship, right, which is not my preferred mode of existence. It's basically a floating strip mall. But we were in this restaurant with maybe 400 tables, and we were the last one, our little table with people gathered around. It was that fascinating a conversation. And, as you might expect, J. Edward Griffin, personal hero of mine for having written Creature from Jekyll Island. And the number of people who were starting to gather around and really wake up to what he was saying, high net worth investors, really is beginning to mark this real sense that I'm feeling that I'm picking up more and more that people are really worried right now, and for good reason. Obviously, they might think it's for Trump, or they might think it's because of votes here and there, but it's really, we have to understand that the system is stressed to the near breaking point. Hasn't yet, but you can feel the strain.
Yeah, I've been sensing that for some high net worth investors, but the general public, the small investor, they seem to be getting into this market at the very top. That there's a distribution going on right now from the strong hands to the weak hands. Got any comments on that?
Well, we've seen that with insider sales for quite a while, particularly in regional banks. They're just offloading shares by insiders a ton. And who's picking it up? Well, it is the retail. This is one of the reasons, Mike, that I think that the market's gone on for too long. It's not just the 250 billion a month the central banks are dumping, and of course, part of the story. But here's the thing about Wall Street. They need to sell to a sucker. That's just part of the game. And what's been happening is it's been hedge funds, private equity, big funds, and Wall Street all sort of duking it out. There's no dumb money in that story. They've really been waiting for like who's going to be left holding the bag. That's always the story that you have to tell at a top. So perversely, I think we're closer to the end than ever because of that sign that the retail investors have finally been lured back. They've got the bullish sentiment. We're seeing the trade data support that. The money flow data support that. They're piling in because I guess things aren't ever going to go down again.
We've heard that story in 1999 and in 2006 and 7. Yeah,
Sure
that's
have.
a real old story. So what do you see are the biggest risks for the average investor right now?
Well, let me count the ways. The risks are missing the signals, buying in at something that's just really dumb. But look at the dumb stuff we have going on in Toronto now. In the city and the suburbs, the average selling price for a home is over $1 million.
Wow.
Everybody knows that the homes don't go down in price up there anymore. They're having investor conferences where I was talking with a gentleman who said he just came from one. They had to book the super arena up there. 15,000 people were showing up, all very, upper middle class people wanting to learn the secrets of how to get even richer at real estate. Here we are again. And you mentioned 2000, 2007. Well, here we are again. The risk for the average investor is that they can't remember stuff from more than 6 years ago.
Yeah, back in 2006 and 7, I was touring the Learning Annex Real Estate Wealth Expos with Donald Trump and Robert Kiyosaki. And it was exactly what you're talking about. And just a couple of weeks ago, landed in New York, and I was listening. The cab driver on the way from Newark Airport into the city had the radio station on, and there was commercial after commercial for getting into real estate again. And I went, oh my God, this bubble is back. So we saw bailouts in 2008. Can you tell us about bail-ins?
Well, bail-ins are something that are now enshrined in law and they've been practiced. So what a bailout is, to start there, is a bank gets in trouble, its capital gets impaired. Basically, it took some bets, the bets went bad, and they are now insolvent. So a bailout says, hey, here's some money, right? And that money comes in the forms of guaranteed loans or even just direct handouts from the government. A bail-in says, wait a minute, if the bank gets in trouble, it's not like they're out of money, it's a bank. Let's go after the money that's inside the bank this time. Well, what does that look like? Well, that's mostly deposits. So for the average person, something the average person never knows, seemingly, is that when you deposit money at the bank, that is now a liability of the bank, right? They owe you that money. That's their liability to give it back. But the way it's structured, if you bother to read all that fine print, which I never do, when you're opening a bank account, they tell you who you are. You are an unsecured creditor of the bank. When you're an unsecured creditor, it means that if a bank gets in trouble and they have to reach in for funds, yours are among the first funds to get reached into, right? There are secured creditors. They're secured either by collateral or by law. And what really shocked me was just a couple of years ago, I call it the Citi Amendment because Citigroup was in there rewriting this law. But really what happened was they had gotten derivatives moved way above depositors in this list of things that get paid out first before you see if you need more money. So if the banks make derivative bets, but who do they make a derivative bet with? Well, with other banks. So they're basically saying any bets bank make with other banks, we're going to have those paid off first. Then the senior bondholders will get paid, then the junior bondholders, and oops, there's no money left. That's where the depositors come into the story. They're the ones who lose under this scenario.
So the depositor's money is the first money to be taken and the last to be paid back, right? You're last in line to be paid back if a bail-in happens.
Well, this actually helps us understand these negative interest rates, right? So sovereign debts, let's talk about, say, German two-year debt, paying minus 1%, right? So who would bother to buy German debt that's going to guaranteed cost them 1% per year? Well, the answer to that is if you're a major corporation and you're the financier or your treasury or you're the CFO, and you have to be sure that your company has a couple of $1 billion in working capital, your choices include leaving it at a bank where it might get bailed in or putting it into German bonds where you're sure you're going to get the money back, but the cost of that is 1%. That's how I understand these negative interest rates now, is really it's people fearing the bail-ins. It's had real impacts, including driving interest rates into negative territory, which is just crazy time.
Yeah. And the term buying debt, like buying German bonds, that is really the other side of that term is loaning them currency. You're not as much buying debt as loaning. You're getting in line to loan somebody some cash for 2 years, 10 years, 30 years, and you're accepting negative interest rates. You're saying just because of the fear then of the bank, if you put it in the bank, they're gonna take it and use it for a bail-in to give it to so the banks give it to themselves. That's pretty nice. They steal it from you and give it to themselves.
Well, again, it's heads they win, tails you lose. One of the wonderful reasons I really enjoyed meeting G. Edward Griffin was he explained that, right? Creature from Jekyll Island, written in the early 90s, explains it's heads they win, tails you lose. Banks take extraordinary risks and they make profits and they get record bonuses. They take extraordinary risks and it blows up on them, and they go and they get bailouts and now bail-ins, but it doesn't matter. One way or the other, they don't take the consequences for their risky behavior.
And whether it's the depositor that pays for the bank to be bailed in, or the government that pays for the bank to be bailed out, if it's the government, the general public still ends up paying through future taxation, right?
Right. And this, I think, when we start seeing some of the populist uprisings politically, this is just a deeply unfair system. And in my world, my perfect world, in 2008, a lot of big banks should have gone out of business because they were reckless and they were run poorly and they made dumb decisions, right? So when I make a dumb stock pick and I lose money on that stock, I don't cry and get a check from my congressman because I made a dumb bet. It's like, pick yourself up, Chris, keep moving. That's how the big boys play. That's what we're told. But the biggest of the big boys, they don't play that way, right? And
Right.
so they always get bailed out or in.
So today we live in this super connected society. Do you see the increasing digitization of life as a potential single point of failure?
Well, I do. I've written about this from a number of directions in the past. So we have articles on what might happen if the grid goes down, meaning the electrical grid. A lot of ways that could happen. It could be a cyber attack. It could be an actual terrorist attack like we saw in San Jose in 2011, where somebody took out transformers and knocked out a whole substation to a third of the city. It could be an electromagnetic pulse, which some people worry about with nuclear weapons maybe detonated in the air, or it could be a coronal mass ejection from the sun. There's a variety of reasons we might lose power, and if we do, this is where I'm personally not a fan of going to complete digitization of, say, currency or money. I know that's a direction we're pushing, but if we did that and the grid goes down, pretty much your payment system is out of commission too, under almost every scenario I've looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So that does concern me. And the other way that I've been writing about this is, look, we're really not making friends in the world. It concerned me a lot the way the United States wanted to make an enemy out of Russia. It confused me. Nobody at the highest policy levels I had access to could explain exactly why we needed Russia to be an enemy at this point. Best I can tell is that certain individuals wanted that, and they've been pushing that story, and the rest of us have been going along with it. But let's just, if we get into a war with Russia or China, which I think is likely at some point, this is probably not, try and get the image out of your head of, men lined up in foxholes, or tanks going across. This next war might well be fought on the financial front, could be a trade war, could be a currency war, a monetary war of some kind. It could be a cyber war. We could have all kinds of intrusions where systems get disrupted. So on that basis alone, that idea of a single point of failure concerns me a lot personally, and I don't think it's robust or wise or prudent to go that route. So I've engineered redundancy in my own life, and I think we should have the same thing when it comes to our most critical systems that we depend on, which would be if you put everything in the electronic basket and your basket breaks, nothing happens. Food doesn't move, fuel doesn't get shipped, plants don't turn on. Amazon doesn't sell. Everything sort of stops at that moment, and that's got to be a concern.
Yeah, one of the things I see when you talk about war, do you think that there is the potential for a world war? We're having this friction with North Korea, but China is on the other side of that. We're having war in Syria, and Russia is on the other side of that. So the potential, what do you see as far as global turmoil right now?
Well, I think the pressures are high as they've been in a long time, and they're continuing to rise. The situation with China, for instance, has been unfolding for a while. China emerged as a major player a while ago. They feel like they deserve to be treated as a major player. I was just there a few months ago, and they really do deserve. Their technology is better than ours. Their infrastructure is better than ours. They're really a very well organized, very capitalistic country when you get down to it. And saving face and having honor, like being treated honorably, is really important to them. I was treated extraordinarily well when I went there, and so to them, diplomacy goes very deep into their culture. So it was real eye opener to me. It was just last year at the G20 meeting when Obama pulled up in his plane. The Chinese officials didn't bring a red carpet. They didn't bring stairs. He had to decamp out the back of his plane on those little stairs that flop out of the back, right? And they had some low-level Chinese officials checking passports, right? That was the reception they got. Every other G20 official that showed up, including Putin, notably in the story, got the full red carpet treatment with the band and Premier Z showing up and all of that. So that was a real snub. Things have only gotten a little more sour with the United States over the islands in the South China Sea. And now even particularly where China at the UN about North Korea has been saying, hold on, we want to talk this through. trust us, nobody really wants a shooting war here in this time. And the United States is saying, yeah, if we have to go to a shooting war, we'll just do that. Like, we're really treating China very badly diplomatically, at least in public, where I get to see it, but where I think it really matters. So those tensions, those may boil over at some point. It doesn't take much in this world today to create a lot of havoc with the systems and the hardware we've got right now.
And one of the things I see is that, international trade is one of the things that makes war less likely. And right now we're erecting barriers to international trade. We don't make cell phones anymore here in the United States. We don't build computers. We don't build television sets here. So we're erecting these trade barriers and tariffs, which are going to cause inflation. They're going to raise prices in the United States and slow trade enough to where a war, if a war started, they don't have as much to lose. Right now, China has a lot to lose because most of their business comes from us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the trade frictions are really starting, and I think that's going to continue for a while. Everybody's been trying to weaken their currency, but of course, it's just axiomatic. Everybody can't because they're all in relationship to each other. They're like, all the currencies are skydivers, and you can fall a little faster or a little slower, but there's really no way to get ahead forever. So for Trump to be saying, hey, I want to talk the dollar down, what he's really saying is I want to talk the yen up and the euro up and all of that. And those countries don't want those things. So everybody sort of is starting to feel the pressure, but we have to take, I think, a full step back and say, hold on. The reason we're having these pressures is that in 2008, we had about 157 in trillion in world debt. It blew up on us. We decided, let's get the credit markets again. We're probably at about 250 trillion in debt right now. Global growth over that whole span of time has been way below average. So the pie isn't expanding anymore. When the pie isn't expanding, it's very hard to do things like conduct reasonable trade policy, make your population feel happy, create jobs, have the jobs pay well. That stuff isn't happening. But at the same time, at the top end of this spectrum, what do we have? We have the rich getting even richer. I don't just mean the rich. I mean shocking statistics where in 2015, 62 people, just 62, had as much wealth as half the world, 3.5 billion people, right? Last year, that number was just 8, right? When you have, that, and again, for Bernanke to get on TV just the other day and go, I think that our policies mostly helped the little guy on Main Street more than anybody. It's like, please, come on. You and your successor, Janet Yellen, drove the largest wealth gap in all of history on purpose, and that has enormous social ramifications. Bernanke, own it. Janet, own it. Be proud of that. Don't try and pretend that wasn't you. Don't be coy. You created the conditions for the largest social unrest that is the possibility for that I've ever seen in my adult lifetime.
So we've got a new president, but, are the old powers that be still in control?
Yeah, meet the new boss, same as the old boss is how I'm looking at it, right? So I actually had a little bit of hope that Trump was going to come in and be something of a wrecking ball, or draining the swamp, whatever metaphor you want. And I think that it didn't happen, right? And so it's pretty clear that there was zero shift in policy around foreign policy at this point in time. The whole idea that we just lobbed 59 cruise missiles into a sovereign nation called Syria on the basis of an attack that was anything but proven who did what and how it actually transpired. The evidence wouldn't stand up in a court of law. In my world, you don't lob missiles into a sovereign nation until you have something that would stand up in a court of law, right? Again,
aren't we supposed to declare war before we do that?
I believe so. I think, you would hope so, right?
Yeah.
So it's really astonishing the things that are going on. But what caught my attention was two things. First was the continued demonization of Russia and Putin, which was happening before Trump came in, went to a fever pitch as soon as he got in until they had gotten him to back off of that. Somebody somewhere, the system that's not the presidency, wants the United States to not have Russia as an ally, prefers them as an enemy in this part of the story. Why? Make up your own reasons why, but that clearly is what happened here. And the second thing is looking at the total number of Goldman Sachs insiders and other deep insiders that that Trump has brought in that are not really connected to the common man, the common person, all of that. It really looks to me like everything that happened under Bush, the second, that happened under Obama, is about to happen again under Trump, at least with respect to the financial crimes that have been occurring for the last 25 years here.
The death of the U.S. dollar standard and the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Got any opinions on that?
I do. It's not something that's going to happen quickly unless there's one scenario that does concern me, and that's if we do get into a war. First, the United States dollar had legitimacy and backing because it was backed by gold. That was under the Bretton Woods II arrangement. That lasted a while. And then about, when that broke in August 15th, 1971, Kissinger actually did a genius thing. We switched it to the petrodollar, it wasn't backed by gold anymore, but it was backed by oil in the sense that if you wanted to buy oil anywhere in the world, it had been engineered that you had to use dollars. So if you're a tiny island nation who has no use for dollars, you did if you bought oil, right? So everybody had to use it. That's starting to fray a little bit right now. Mm-hmm. So the part that concerns me is now I think the dollar is mostly backed by the perception, if not the reality, of U.S. military might. And we have a really mighty military, provided you're a small nation. What concerns me is this idea that if we do get into a larger shooting match with, say, Russia, we're going to discover that the way the United States projects its influence militarily is with a navy. If you can't sail there, you can't really get there. And we're going to discover in this next war that ships are large floating metal containers looking for a reason to sink. Russia's been working on extraordinary military technology. Their missile technology is second to none. I think that we have some real learnings. And here's what I'm worried about. The United States has this reserve currency status because of the perception of might, not unlike a schoolyard bully, right? As long as that illusion and perception sits there, you're good to go. If that gets dinged for any reason, all of a sudden, a lot of nations have a lot less reason to hold dollars. And that's where I could worry about something where we might suddenly have a fairly rapid adjustment, which is to say nothing of if we actually get into a deeper scrape with China and China decides to flex its nearly $1.5 trillion US dollars of reserve currency holdings that they decide to unload at some point. These are all things that could be really very concerning. Not immediately, but I'm keeping my eye out for them.
So to sum this up, what do you see coming in the world in general, and how do you plan to navigate it in the future?
Well, let me take this in three phases. The near-term phase, we're not quite done with this bubble yet. Again, $250 billion of thin air central bank money dumped into the markets every month. Where do markets go? They go up. There's no other place for that money to go. So right. The markets aren't that much of a mystery to me. Sooner or later, that breaks. So that's kind of over the intermediate term. That's a really unsustainable trend. Anything that's unsustainable will stop. When that crush comes, that's where we have to sort of be ready for almost anything, because it could be a big deflationary bust, or it could be the central banks really freak out, start shoving money into individual bank accounts, and then we're off the inflationary route. Still don't know how we go down that path yet. But even longer term, I'm very concerned with the fact that the last 3 years, 2014, 15, 16, the lowest levels of oil discoveries in my data series, which goes back to the 1920s, because nobody's spending money looking for oil. Why does that matter? Well, it takes 5 to 10 years for discoveries to become oil that's out of the ground. So somewhere, start a clock, 5 years from 2014 is 2019. In 2019, that oil isn't showing up on the market that we didn't find, if I can double negative that up. So I'm really looking for oil to be a little bit kind of in a range for a while, but somewhere in the next 5 years or so, it really shoots up. And at that point, we get to revisit 2008 again. Remember, 2008, people called it a housing bubble, but it was more than that. It was a worldwide contagion. And in July of 2008, oil went to 147 a barrel and ran smack dab into about 150 trillion of worldwide debt. I think we are going to run into an oil price that's higher than that, and it's going to run into 250 or more trillion dollars of debt. So I think we'll see 2008 again, but this time it's going to be really a lot more dramatic. And so What do you do to prepare for that? That's a very long conversation. Adam Taggart and I have written a book called Prosper. Takes people through 8 different forms of capital that if you're rich in all of those, hey, your life's better today and you're more resilient for whatever might come in the future. And so I think it's time for personal preparation. I don't spend a lot of time trying to imagine who the next president might be. Too late for that in my mind. We're going to have to play this story out. There's going to be a little bit of a hard time. Please take good care of what capital you have, all 8 forms, because when the dust settles, I think that's the moment when you want to be able to pick back up and keep moving. But there's a little uncomfortable moment between here and there.
Well, on that note, I think it wraps it up. I want to thank you so much for your time. And Chris's website is peakprosperity.com. And I want to thank you, Chris. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
All right. My pleasure, Mike.